Is mapping the process for your project, your department, or your organization overwhelming you? Are you stuck in an endless meeting loop where you're creating conflicting process flows, where the team ends up more confused than when you started, and when you just can't get off of that hamster wheel? I've been there too, stuck trying to nail down what everybody does and wondering why something so important has to be so complicated. In this video, I'll show you my streamlined process based off of Six Sigma that allows you to capture exactly what the team needs and alleviate the confusion. This works preparing for a system implementation or just process mapping your organizational workflow. It helps to mitigate the confusion and give you exactly what you're looking for, a clear, concise process map. Think of it like building a skyscraper. You wouldn't let the team get started without having a blueprint. Everyone needs to work off of the same plans in order to succeed. That's what this framework is, your blueprint for success. And if you stay with me until the end, I'll share with you some of my best practices that I've learned over the years that help not only to save my time, but also the time of your team. I'll start off by sharing with you why I believe most of these process mapping efforts fail. Most process mapping efforts fail because teams tend to dive right into the detail too quickly. They start going towards the button clicks and what people actually do, not why they're doing them. They try to get one map that fits all, or they don't really have a clear vision on what they're trying to accomplish. Without having a clear alignment on what you're trying to do, you end up with a lot of rework, a lot of confusion, and you're really not having that clear vision on what you're trying to accomplish, and you're not able to tell your team what you're trying to accomplish. And ultimately, you'll end up with process maps that nobody uses and they just sit on a shelf collecting dust. What makes this framework different? It really comes down to one word: structure. Most process mapping exercises, like I said before, start in the middle or the lower levels. Teams are then pulled down rabbit holes and they lose focus. This framework is different in that it's a top-down framework. You get alignment at the top before you start digging into the details. Once you get alignment with the stakeholders at the top level, then you move down the process map layer by layer. This framework is perfect when you're under-resourced or when you need to move very quickly, which is almost always. The first step that we need to talk about is purpose and outcome. Why are we mapping this process? What decisions will this map support? Who needs it? And what level of detail is appropriate? A common mistake that I see a lot of shops make is that they skip this step, and then when they get into a room where the vendor is asking what it is that they want to do, that's when they start having these conversations. The project starts off on the wrong foot. You start burning resource hours, and you already go into a budget deficit right out of the gate. All right, so once you've gotten clarity on the purpose, it's time to align the stakeholders and get everybody singing off the same sheet of music. Getting stakeholder alignment. So there's some key steps to get stakeholders aligned and get the buy-in up front. Those are: identify the key stakeholders. These are the decision makers, the influencers, and the end users. Set clear expectations, what you're going to map and what you're not going to include in the map. This is done by defining the boundaries, the start and the end points of the process. Then secure the buy-in with the stakeholders and let them know that this is the scope of what you're trying to map and how it's going to benefit them. Doing a process mapping exercise is very similar to that of a project. You have a scope. You need to make sure that you manage to that scope. So it's in everybody's best interest to get this alignment, so that way the scope doesn't expand and then you start having to map processes that you weren't intending to map, and this will then elongate your timeline and you won't be successful. Without this alignment, miscommunication can delay progress. Treat this like any other project scope in the processes you are and you are not mapping. If you don't manage this correctly, scope creep will rear its ugly head. It can turn into a never-ending story, and you run a risk of your processes never being fully defined. A best practice is to get an executive level process map and get executive level buy-in on the end-to-end process of what you're trying to map. I tend to use the SIPOC but you can use 3 to 5 boxes at the strategic level that encapsulate all of the main chunks of what it is that you're trying to process map, that you can then represent to these executive level stakeholders and communicate to them that this is the end-to-end process. But how can you get all of this done, especially if you're low on resources or you have a time crunch? I'm going to go ahead and give you a pro tip, like I said at the end, that will help you to really streamline the amount of effort needed in order to accomplish all of these goals. But first, let's talk about actually mapping the core processes. Now that you have alignment at the executive level and you have that strategic process map, or the SIPOC that we talked about, you can move down to the next level and actually map the core processes. Map only the key activities, the decisions, and the handoffs. Resist getting bogged down into the details. Try to keep this at a more mid-level discussion. You can use sticky notes. I like to use a product called Canva. I'll put a link in the description up top. Anything that allows you to iteratively rearrange the processes so you can move quickly and brainstorm. One thing I tend to do is go one step in and one step out from the exit and entry criteria. What that means is once you get your end-to-end process done, I go one step into the process and map that entry level, and then one step out, where once we're done with that exit, where does it go? That allows me to make sure that I've had that communication and that I haven't missed anything on the in and out of that process. Now that your process maps are taking form and you've started to outline the steps, how do you identify any inefficiencies that could derail your project? The next section is where we're going to make it useful. This is the validation step. A map that isn't validated tends to collect dust. Validation ensures that the map serves its purpose and that it reflects reality. So what are some of the steps to make it useful? Step 1 is you validate the map with all of the stakeholders. I got a quick tip on this, and once I get through with this list, I'll share that with you on exactly how I do this. Step 2, use this map for decision making and communication. Incorporate it into your workflow and make it a living document. The last step is to make sure that you keep it updated as your processes evolve. Don't let it die on the vine. You spent a lot of time, a lot of effort getting it to this point. Just make sure that you do a monthly or a quarterly check on it, and it will remain useful for years to come. So in order to validate it with all of the stakeholders, I like to do this in a live setting. I print up all of the process maps. I start with a SIPOC, I go to the mid-level, I get all my detail maps out there, and then I call it a red pen party. I invite all of the chief stakeholders into it, and then we go end to end, and people can mark up the paper maps that are on the wall. And this is a really beneficial tightening up of the maps that we really need to do in order to call them complete. If you're doing this in a virtual environment, you can use that product that I talked about, Canva. There's other products out there, but I tend to like that one. And then you can go into that. It has a digital whiteboard. You can put these process maps out there and everybody can contribute virtually. Now that you got to this point, your map is ready to guide your team. But remember, process mapping isn't one and done. It's an evolving tool for success. Now for that pro tip that we talked about at the beginning of the video. This tip has saved me countless hours and helped me to maximize my interactions with the business units so they can focus on their day-to-day and get me what I need in order to do my process mapping. Once I've identified all of the main processes, I get with those process owners, I schedule the time with them, and then I use a tool like Zoom or Teams or another type of recording software to be able to have them take me end to end on those processes on the happy path or the main use case. I don't worry about the edge cases right away. I have them take me through the main cases in a perfect world. And then we start talking about some of the alternate and exceptions that can happen in those processes. By recording them, I have them captured and I can go back and refer to them. I can get the transcripts and I can now put them through one of the AI tools out there, whether you use ChatGPT or have another product out there. but I can then clearly identify exactly what those processes are intended to do from the user themselves. Just make sure to take notes as you're going through it with the users. It's always good to have a backup copy. As project managers, we're typically used to taking notes anyway. And when you're taking notes, it may spark some type of question for you that then you can ask and have the user clarify while they're doing the recording. And that will also help to maximize your time with the user. If you found a lot of value in this video, I hope you consider subscribing to the channel. I'll be bringing more content like this in the future. And if you have any recommendations on the content that you'd like to see, please drop it below in the comments. Make sure to connect, learn, and innovate